Right now, somewhere in your body, you are carrying something that was already old when the pyramids were new. Not a memory, not a story your grandmother told you, something physical. A piece of code that was written before anyone knew what writing was, passed down through roughly 10,000 generations of people who never met each other, and ended up in you. Most of us hear the word inheritance and think about money, a house, a watch, and a drawer, some land if the family got lucky. But for about 99% of human history, nobody inherited any of that. No deed, no bank, no will. It's something still moved from parent to child anyway, over and over, and some of it is still moving. It is in your bones and your gut and the way you flinch at certain sounds. It is in the words coming out of your mouth right now. So what did ancient humans actually leave each other? Almost everything, it turns out, just not the parts you would expect. Start with the obvious one, because it is stranger than it sounds. Your ancestors inherited bodies, and those bodies came with constructions they did not write. In 2010, the scientist named Svante Pääbo and his team in Germany did something people said could not be done. They pulled DNA out of Neanderthal bones tens of thousands of years old, and they read it. What they found changed the family tree. If your family comes from anywhere outside Africa, about 1 to 2% of your DNA is Neanderthal. Not as a figure of speech. Real pieces of it, sitting in your cells right now from a kind of human that died out around 40,000 years ago. Pääbo won a Nobel Prize for that in 2022. And the reason it was such a big deal is that we could finally see inheritance instead of guessing at it. Some of what they handed down helps you. There are Neanderthal genes tied to your immune system, to how your skin handles sunlight, to how your blood clots. The Neanderthals had been living through cold northern winters for hundreds of thousands of years before we showed up. They had it figured out, and when the two groups met and had children together, that head start came over to us. Some of it does not help you at all. Those same Neanderthal genes have been linked to blood clotting problems and to certain autoimmune conditions. During the pandemic, researchers found a set of Neanderthal genes tied to people getting hit harder by COVID. So, a gene that kept somebody alive through a European winter 50,000 years ago can make you sicker today. Nobody checked the quality of what got sent down. It just came. Then there are the Denisovans. We barely knew they existed until 2010, when a single finger bone turned up in a cave in Siberia. People in Melanesia and parts of Southeast Asia carry up to 4 or 5% Denisovan DNA. And one Denisovan gene, called EPASA1, shows up over and over in people from Tibet. It changes how your body handles thin air. It is the reason people can live and work at 14,000 feet without their blood getting dangerously thick. Sit with that. Thousands of generations back, somebody had a child with a completely different kind of human, and that is why their descendants can breathe on top of a mountain. But genes are only the first layer, and honestly the least interesting one. Here's the thing about ancient humans. They inherited knowledge, and knowledge does something genes cannot. It piles up. A gene takes generations to spread. A trick spreads in an afternoon. And once humans worked out how to hold on to tricks across generations, everything changed. You did see it in the stones. The oldest stone tools we agree on, the Odoan kind, show up in East Africa around 2.6 million years ago. They are simple. One rock hit against another to make a sharp edge. Useful, but basic. And here's the part that should bother you. That design barely changed for about 1 million years. A person could use the exact same tools their great-grandparent used, and their great-grandchild would use them too. Then, around 1.76 million years ago, something shifted. The Acheulean hand axe shows up. It is even on both sides. It is shaped on both faces. To make one, you have to hold a picture in your head of a thing that does not exist yet. Then chip away at a rock in the right order until you get there. You do not stumble into that by accident. You do not work it out alone in one lifetime. Researchers have actually tested this. They tried teaching modern people to make these tools, and just watching somebody do it barely worked. People got better when the teacher used their hands to guide them. They got better again when the teacher talked them through it. So the hand axe is not just a tool. It is proof that somebody taught somebody else, not through genes, through sitting down with them, showing them, telling them they got it wrong, and going again. And once that started, we had something no other animal on Earth has. The child could start their life where their parents finished theirs. Anthropologists call this cumulative culture. And it might be the most important thing our species ever inherited because it is what made every other inheritance possible. Take a bow and arrow. Looks simple. It is not. You need to know which wood bends right, how to dry it, how to make a string that will not stretch, how to set the feathers so the arrow flies straight, how to chip a point, how to tie that point on so it does not fly off on impact. In some places, you also need to know which plant gives you a poison that works, how to cook it down, and how to handle it without killing yourself. Nobody invents all that. Not in one life, not in 10. Every single step is a small discovery made by somebody whose name is gone forever, tested against failure, and handed forward. The Hadza in Tanzania still hunt with poison arrows made from the sap of a desert rose. A Hadza boy learns to shoot at about 3 years old with a small bow. By 8, he can go out alone and come back with a bird. That is not talent. That is an inheritance getting installed, one afternoon at a time. There is an older version of this, and it is more literal than you would think. For most of human history, starting a fire from scratch was hard work. Keeping one going was easier, so people carried fire with them. A smoldering ember packed in bark or wrapped in hide, bed just enough to survive the walk, handed off from camp to camp. Some groups kept the same fire alive for years. The flame you sat next to was, literally, the flame your grandmother sat next to. And if it went out and nobody nearby had one, you were in real trouble. That is about as close as ancient humans got to a family heirloom. Not something you owned, something you had to keep breeding. And all of it had to be handed over by somebody, which brings us to the strangest inheritance of all. Your childhood is ridiculously long. A horse can walk within an hour of being born. A chimp is mostly on its own by 5. A human takes 15 or 20 years to really stand on their own, and that is being generous. For survival, that is a terrible setup. A helpless kid is a burden and has to be carried, fed, protected, and taught for years while giving nothing back. Any other animal that tried this would get wiped out fast. So why did it work for us? Because the long childhood is not a flaw. It is storage time. It is the window where all of this gets loaded in. This is the thing anthropologists call the grandmother hypothesis. We are the only primates where the females keep living for decades after they stop having children. For most animals, once you cannot reproduce, you are done, not us. Kristen Hawkes and her team studied the Hadza in the 1980s and 90s and found that the older women were often the hardest working food gatherers in camp. Women in their 50s and 60s were bringing back more food per day than mothers in their 20s. Plenty were still walking 5 to 10 miles a day into their 70s. Those grandmothers fed the grandchildren, which meant mothers could have more babies sooner. But they were doing something else, too. They were the oldest memory in camp. They had lived through more droughts, more bad hunts, more sick children than anyone else there. So when something went wrong in a way it had not gone wrong in 20 years, they were the only ones who had seen it before. In a world with no writing, an old person is a library, and it goes further than long childhoods and old age. We are the only apes that hand our babies to other people. A chimp mother will not let another chimp hold her newborn for months. She carries it herself all day and gets aggressive if anyone reaches for it. Human mothers hand their babies over within days. To sisters, to aunts, to grandmothers, to older kids, to people they are not even related to. An anthropologist named Sarah Blaffer-Hurdy has spent her career arguing that this one habit explains a huge amount about us. She calls it cooperative breeding. If you can put the baby down, you can go get food. If several adults care about one child, that child survives a bad year that would have killed a baby depending on one tired mother. And a baby that gets passed around learns fast. It learns to read faces. It learns who will help and who will not. It learns how to make an adult who did not give birth to it want to keep it alive. Bertie thinks that is where our ability to read other people came from. The thing we are better at than any animal on Earth might have started with babies learning to win over a broom, which means the empathy you use every day could be a side effect of how our ancestors passed children around. We did not get good at understanding each other and then start sharing our kids. We shared our kids, and understanding each other is what we had to become. And this is where you start to see what ancient humans really inherited, not objects. Access. Access to the memory of everyone who came before. And access to people. The Juhonsi of the Kalahari have a system called Fexero. People call it gift exchange, but that makes it sound smaller than it is. You give somebody something. Month later, maybe years later, they give you something back. The objects barely matter. What you are building is a named partner, a specific person who owes you and who you owe, and everybody knows it. Polly Wiesner found people keeping many of these partnerships going at once, spread over huge distances, sometimes well over 100 miles of desert. Here is why that matters. Rain in the Kalahari is patchy. Your area can dry up completely while somewhere 4 days walk away is doing fine. If you have a XRO partner over there, you can just go. You will be fed. Not because they feel sorry for you, because you two have a relationship with rules and you both know the rules. And here is a part that gets me. Those partnerships were inherited. Parents handed them down to their kids. So a young adult did not start out with nothing. They started out holding a map of people spread across hundreds of miles who owed them and expected to be asked. That is an inheritance. It just does not fit in a box. It is a safety net made of people. In a bad year, it was worth more than anything you could carry on your back. That memory needed somewhere to live, and where it lived was language. You cannot dig up a sentence. There is no fossil for conversations, but we can still trace what got passed down because language leaves marks on itself. In 1786, a British judge in Calcutta named William Jones gave a lecture that quietly cracked history open. He'd been studying Sanskrit, the old language of Indian religious texts, and he pointed out that Sanskrit looked way too much like Greek and Latin for it to be a coincidence. The word for father, the word for mother, the word for three, even the grammar lined up. So, he said all these languages must have come from one older language that no longer exists. He was right. We now call it Proto-Indo-European. Nobody alive has ever heard it. There is not one written word of it anywhere on Earth. Linguists built it back up by working backwards, comparing hundreds of languages and tracking how sounds shift in the same predictable ways. What they got was a language probably spoken 5,000 or 6,000 years ago on the grasslands north of the Black Sea, and today about half the planet speaks one of its children. English is one of those children. So is Hindi, Russian, Spanish, Persian, Greek, German, Bengali, and Polish. When an English speaker says the word for mother and a Hindi speaker says theirs, they are both saying a worn-down version of a word that some real person said out loud, to some real child, thousands of years ago. You inherited a dead person's mouth movements every day. You never noticed. Language carried more than words, though. Words are how you pass on the parts you cannot just show somebody. You can show a person how to chip a stone. You cannot show them what happened in the drought before they were born. For that, you need a story. In 2014, Polly Wiesner published a study based on years of recorded conversations among the Juhoansi. During the day, the talk was almost all practical. Who was hunting where, which plants are ready, who took more than their share. But at night, around the fire, it flipped completely. 81% of the night conversations were stories. Stories about people in faraway places. Stories about ancestors. Myths about how the world started. Jokes that had to camp laughing. Wiesner's argument is that firelight is where human culture actually got handed over. The fire did not just keep predators outside a 30-foot circle. It made a window every single night where everything the group had learned could be passed to whoever was sitting there listening, including the kids who were supposed to be asleep. That is the whole system, not a document. A voice in the dark every night for 300,000 years. Some of what came through that channel held for an astonishing amount of time. Along the coast of Australia, Aboriginal groups tell stories about land that is now under the ocean. Places where people used to camp, hunt, old ceremonies, all underwater now. In 2016, two researchers named Patrick Nunn and Nicholas Reed took 21 of these coastal stories and lined them up against what we know about sea levels. The sea rose fast at the end of the last ice age and settled about 7,000 years ago. The stories describe the coastline from before that, which means people have been telling those stories out loud with no writing at all for 7,000 years or more. Grandparent to grandchild, roughly 300 times in a row, and the information about where the shore used to be made it the whole way. No filing cabinet on Earth has that track record. It only held up because they built it to. Stories that last that long are not casual chatter. In a lot of Aboriginal traditions, a story has a keeper. Certain people are responsible for certain knowledge, and they are expected to get it right. Others who know the same story listen and correct them when they slip. A lot of it is tied to real places, so the land itself keeps the story honest. Nunn and Reed pointed to that constant checking is a big reason it stayed accurate so long. Now think about how you would pass on a phone number. You would write it down and forget it 2 seconds later. They never had that option. So they built the checking into the telling. And that raises the question sitting under all of this. If humans could hold on to a coastline for 7,000 years, what happened to everything else? Here's the uncomfortable part. Almost all of it is gone. Knowledge piles up, but it also falls apart. There is a case from Tasmania archaeologists have argued about for years. About 10,000 years ago, rising seas cut Tasmania off from mainland Australia and left a small group of people on their own. Over the thousands of years after that, the tools in the ground get simpler. Things that used to show up stop showing up. Low tools, for one. Researchers still argue over how much of that was real loss and how much was people adapting to a different place. But the basic point is not in doubt. A skill always survives as long as somebody alive still knows it and somebody younger is watching. Break that in one generation and it is not coming back. Think about how thin that is. Every skill your ancestors had lived only in someone's head. If the person who knew how to make a certain medicine died in a bad winter without passing it on, that knowledge left the world for good. Not misplaced, gone. Somewhere in your family line, there were people who knew which plants brought a fever down, how to read the weather off the way birds were acting, how to find water in a place that looked bone dry, how to work a material with their hands until it did exactly what they wanted. Thousands of skills, sharpened over thousands of years, and you have almost none of them. You got the genes. You got the language. You got the long childhood that was built for soaking all this up. But the actual knowledge, the useful part, mostly did not make it. And what did make it, when you think about the trade, is strange. The stuff that survived is the stuff somebody wrote down. And the oldest writing we have is not poetry. It is not philosophy. Some of the earliest clay tablets out of Mesopotamia are receipts. List of grain, counts of livestock, notes about who owed what to who. The very first time humans figured out how to store information outside a human head, they used it to do the books. That is a moment everything flips. Once information could sit on clay instead of inside a person, inheritance became a totally different thing. You could leave something to a child you never met. You could inherit from someone who died before you were born. Ownership could be written down, which made it worth fighting over. And the old kind of inheritance started to look like nothing because you cannot put it on a tablet. Here's what I keep coming back to. When somebody dies today, we go through their things. We split the accounts. We argue about the house. That is what the word means to us now. For 300,000 years, when somebody died, what the group lost was a library. Every plant they knew, every route they had walked, every story they carried about people nobody else remembered. All of it left the world in one afternoon, unless they had already handed it to somebody. That was the whole system. No archive, no backup, just a handoff, which either happened or did not. And it worked. It worked well enough to reach you. Your body is carrying choices made by people whose names never existed in any language we can read. You speak a worn-down version of a language nobody has heard in 6,000 years. And you had a childhood long enough for somebody older to pour into you what they already knew, so you did not have to learn it the hard way. Everything you know came from somebody. Everything they knew came from somebody else. That chain runs back unbroken, and every single link is a real person who taught somebody before they died. The only part of any of this that ever mattered was the passing on, and that is the one part we still get to do.